My name is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I also teach on a regular basis in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And for the last several years, I've increasingly been teaching online. And this is the fifth in what I believe will ultimately be a six-part series, an initial series of videos I'm producing on basically how to use Alexander Technique directions for your own benefit. Now, one of the questions that does come up, I think both with teachers who ask their teachers to use these kinds of directions and with students, is how often should I be thinking them? And how many times a day should I be thinking them? And how can I remember to think them? So I'll start by saying there is no perfect answer to either of those questions. With students who come have in-person lessons with me, it sometimes happens that they'll come for a second lesson, and I'll ask them how they did with the direction, usually just one that we explored in the first lesson, and they'll say, I forgot all about it. A week has passed and they didn't remember to use it. That problem does not occur very often online for a number of reasons. So for a teacher, it's a little disconcerting because the student's not doing their homework and so on. But I think if you could aim to devote, if you think, well, in terms of time commitment, if 10 minutes a day doesn't seem too unreasonable, and actually it's not really a time commitment so much as just carving out some activities that you're likely to do anyway and using them to experiment. 10 minutes a day would be a really good amount. In the kind of experiments that we've been talking about, where I've suggested the maximum length is in the neighborhood of 20 or 30 seconds. So it means that several times during the day, in the midst of whatever activity you're doing, or if you want to carve out a specific time to do an activity just for experimental purposes, that's fine too. If you did it the kind of number of times that those figures suggest, so maybe 20 times a day, you devote a half a minute to this process, that would be fine. Occasionally, and more would be fine too. Now, sometimes, very occasionally, students will report back, I'm just exhausted from using these directions. And I ask them how often they're using them, and it's like pretty much the whole time. And I don't recommend that. I think for most people, the best strategy is to carve out these little short sections of time, and they're very short, and try as much as possible to integrate them with your normal activities. So let's say you've got to walk down the hall to consult with a colleague at work. Perfect opportunity to run a little experiment. Or perhaps you're sitting at your desk and you're writing a document out, and you just say, okay, the next 3 or 4 lines, it's all the first couple of lines I'm going to use a direction, the third line, no, fourth line, fifth line, I'll bring it back. And because it's word processing, when you're using a direction, your coordination is changing, and it's entirely possible you'll make a typo. So you just go back and correct anything it needs correcting, because your hands and fingers will be moving a little differently than you're used to. So use these directions as much as possible in your ordinary activities, because that, after all, is where you're going to want them to help you. Now, a second question that sometimes comes up people will say, well, you know, I go for days without using them. I need some way to remind myself to do it. Now, again, there's no perfect answer to that. Some people have found it helpful to put little stickers on their bathroom mirror or above their fridge or where they're going to see it, and just as little reminders. Maybe on the steering wheel of your car. When you get into the car, you sit down. Wow, perfect opportunity to use to run a little experiment with Alexander directions. You can, of course, install various reminder devices on a computer. There are a whole bunch of free apps that'll do that for you. The other thing is, if you're taking Alexander sessions, or if you're watching these videos because you have an actual physical issue that you notice, when you notice it, that would be a perfect time to think, oh, wow, okay, I'm feeling a little pain in my shoulder. Perfect time to bring to bear an Alexander direction. So I think that's about all I can say about that. Don't overdo it. I guess one thing I would add is maybe even more important than the number of times a day you use the direction is that you're very say, I hate to use the word vigilant, but you're not putting any effort into using them. There's no effort. It's just a thought. So I'll leave you with that. We're going to have one more session, and that's going to be it for this series.